This stray dog mourned my mother's death. I never had a pet dog. But I was never truly alone. On the streets, where most walked past without a second glance, two loyal hearts waited for me every day. They didn't wear collars. They didn't have names until we gave them. But they were ours. Among the forgotten and the strays, I found something stronger than ownership. I found family. Sundar and Tipu weren't just dogs. They were my protectors, my shadows, and my mother's most cherished souls. Before we begin, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Every morning, as I stepped out of my home, they followed. Sundar and Tipu never needed a leash or a command, they just knew. They walked beside me, matching my pace, their eyes constantly scanning the street. If a stranger came too close, Tipu would move ahead, placing himself between me and the unknown. He didn't bark unless he had to. Most of the time, his presence was enough. A silent warning that I was never alone. When I reached the rickshaw stand, they waited until I was safely inside. Only then did they turn back, their job done. At home, they were just as vigilant. Whenever my mother had to leave us alone, she never worried. She had two silent protectors standing guard. She would say, "Look after them until I'm back." And they listened. They sat by the door, ears perked, tails still. They didn't sleep, didn't wander. They watched. And until she returned, nothing, no stranger, no sound, no movement, went unnoticed. One day, I was arguing with a rickshaw driver over the fare. His voice grew louder, frustration turning into anger. He wanted more money than what was fair, and he wasn't backing down. Before I could even react, I heard it, the sharp sound of paws hitting the ground. Fast. Tipu was across the street a moment ago, but now he was running toward us, his eyes locked on the man, his growl deep and threatening. The driver froze. His anger disappeared, replaced by sudden fear. Tipu wasn't big. But in that moment, he was a lion. His body was tense, his stance firm, ready to attack if needed. The driver quickly took the right fare, muttered something under his breath, and drove away. Tipu didn't chase him. He didn't bark after him. Instead, he turned to me and sniffed my hands, my feet, checking, making sure I was okay. Only when he was satisfied did he take a step back and sit beside me, calm again, as if nothing had happened. That was Tipu. He didn't just love us. He watched over us. When my mother passed away, I wasn't home. But they were. They had spent years by her side, waiting at the doorstep when she left, wagging their tails when she returned. She fed them, spoke to them like they were family, cared for them when they were sick. And now she was gone. But Sundar and Tipu didn't leave. That night, as grief filled my home, they sat at the foot of the stairs, unmoving. People tried to shoo them away. Some threw harsh words, others tossed stones. But they didn't budge. They stayed, braving the cold, the cruelty, the emptiness, waiting for the one person who had loved them most. When I finally arrived home at midnight, exhausted, broken, I saw them. Still there. Still waiting. The morning after my mother's passing, the house was heavy with silence. The family moved quietly, preparing for the last rites. There was no talking, no sound, just the weight of loss settling into every corner. And then I saw Sundar. She walked toward me, slow and hesitant. I thought she was hungry. I reached into my pocket, took out 2 biscuits, and held them out to her. She sniffed them but didn't eat. Instead, she stepped closer, and placed her head under my hand. I froze. Her body was still, but her eyes held something deeper than words. They weren't looking for food. They weren't asking for anything. They were filled with something I never expected to see in a dog: grief. I stroked her head softly, the way my mother always did. She closed her eyes, pressing into my touch, as if she had been waiting for it. And in that moment I understood. She wasn't just a dog. She was mourning. For years have passed. Tipu is gone now, but Sundar, she stayed. She is older, slower, with more white around her muzzle. But she is still here. My father takes care of her now, just as my mother once did. Every morning he sets food down for her, waiting patiently as she eats. He pats her head gently, speaking to her in soft tones, as if she understands every word. She was your mother's favorite, he says. Now she's my responsibility. Cinder wags her tail, a small but certain sign of recognition. Then she rests her head on his feet, just as she once did with my mother. She doesn't need words to understand. She knows she is still loved. She knows she still belongs. Cinder rests on the same stairs where she once waited. The same place where she stood guard, where she mourned, where she refused to leave. People say street dogs don't belong to anyone. But I know that's not true. Tipu, running to protect me. Sundar, grieving beside me. My mother, feeding them with love. My father, keeping the promise she left behind. They never needed a leash or a home with walls to prove their loyalty. They don't belong to anyone, because they belong to family.